Matthew, welcome to Real Vision.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks for having me.
I've really been looking forward to this interview for some time now. You have a really interesting background. You were an early investor in Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bloq One, in Coinbase. You've been to the space for a very long time. You began connecting people starting back in 2013, and you've had an interesting career as a venture capitalist as well. We're going to talk more about some of the things that you're doing at Bloq in a moment. But first, tell us a little bit about your journey, your early days as an investor.
Well, I guess I'll start by, I'm a first generation Polish American. So my parents immigrated from Poland, and I actually learned Polish before I learned English. So Chicago's this classic immigrant town for Poles, where it's the largest populated city outside of Warsaw for Polish folks. That's why there was this big migration here, and there were families and infrastructure, et cetera. I started out growing up in Chicago, and then I worked for a private equity firm and ultimately wound up at Advent International in London. And it was a lucky break because we're working on a deal together with Advent, and they kind of noticed me and then started recruiting me. And I didn't have an MBA. I was the youngest principal they ever hired. So it was like all this kind of exciting new, this ability to break through this private equity bubble was pretty cool. But the entire time I was there, I was looking out the window, and the early internet was starting. Like you could see like this, the .com, the early internet, all these new companies were forming, market was going crazy. And at Advent, it was, a very conservative white shoe private equity firm that stuck to their knitting. So they really missed the early internet because of their discipline. But during those early days, I left and started an internet fund, raised $250 million from Microsoft, HP, and Dell, and was chasing opportunities in the early internet, which was a pretty wild time. People would be coming in with utensils.com, and people would get funded with the most obscure things. There's some interesting analogs to certain tokenized projects today. But with all that, yeah. I went from this private equity kind of diligence, rigor-minded kind of discipline to the fast-paced kind of moments of the early internet. And that was a really interesting transition for me. And then the market fell, out the other end of that after, 2000, kind of spring of 2000. And then I went from
I remember those days well. I was at Credit Suisse, and they were incredible. I mean, we were both sort of the young kids back in those days, and they were heady times. I mean, it was just surreal. And I remember, and I guess it was April of 2000 when the bottom fell out of that market. 20-something-year-old me was like, wait, so it doesn't just go up forever. It's not just this incredible curve ever upward. And it was a shocking time, but a fascinating juxtaposition to hear you talk about the world of private equity. And, going back to the late 90s, early 2000s, private equity was a very sort of formal button down space. And then the new world being born in the Valley and in technology. What an incredible experience to have at that age.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and Credit Suisse was our banker as well. So fond memories with all those folks. But it was a crazy time because, private equity discipline, you would do diligence, you kind of go through this whole process. And in the venture space, it was a lot more instinctual, a lot more founder-led. You didn't have cash flows, didn't have a brand, didn't have all those things that you look for. And so then you have to look at the technology and then look at the team that's going to develop this. And so it was pretty cool on the ascent, but on the back end of that, I had to learn how to operate businesses. I had to think about how to find a compass, and the market already collapsed. And so if you had cash, if you had a business model, if you had a team, you would be able to withstand that. And if you didn't, and you were short on cash, or your business model needs to evolve, or your team was, 50%, then those companies would kind of disappear. And so I had to figure out which end was up in the portfolio. We had like 25 businesses and had to find the compass of what worked, what didn't work, shutting companies down, firing people. It was kind of a bloodbath out the other end of that, but it really, from an operating standpoint, it taught me how to find the center of a business and then really kind of focus your time and energy on like the winners, if you will, or where there's substance. And so that was really hard to kind of go through, all these businesses and try and collate that into a kind of a priority set or some kind of way in which you would apply, your energy. And so that was, gave me all these kind of the scar tissue on my arms in terms of trying to figure that out. But that was helpful. And, post that chapter, I wound up starting my own venture firm and built 4 enterprise software companies along the way in HR, video surveillance, emergency notification, managed services. And so partnered and co-founded a lot of businesses and kind of went from, investor to operator to investor operator in a lot of different spaces, primarily in the cloud space, software as a service, and building really practical, useful technologies. I was always enamored by those entrepreneurs that would come in and say, oh, we're going to change the world with, this dating app or this, whatever. And you're kind of like, it's not really going to change the world. Or sometimes you saw things that were like, wow, that's going to change the world. And I never really had that until I came across crypto and Bitcoin. That was the moment where I was like, there is something at that intersection of change the world, economic freedom, all these kind of the decentralized nature of it, and the early kind of, trying to fit that into a model was really tough, but it had all the aspects of the things I was in a weird way looking for, of like the change the world, intersection of tech and finance. And it was just kind of like too interesting to pass up.
Yeah. So what was your first experience? What was your first exposure? I know you were very early, but how did you become aware of it at first? What were your initial thoughts? And then how did you kind of scale into it?
It was fortunate. Bought a company in Singapore in 2005, and it became a social gaming platform in Southeast Asia. And so I was chairman of this company. And when you're in social gaming, think about like, Zynga back in the day, but in Southeast Asia, that was the business model. But the dynamics of running a social gaming platform, payment processing became a really sticky, tough, cumbersome, full of friction dynamic. And payment processing became a core competency to get credit cards, ACH, wires to 9 different countries, and trying to figure out how to make heads or tails of that. And that kind of led the thinking to, let's build an exchange for gaming credits. So if Ash, on your platform, you would have Ash credits and I would have Mac credits, then we would go in this exchange and you would exchange that for mine, and then I could play into your gaming system. And it was this interesting exchange for gaming credits. And then this is now 2011. Somebody said, there's this thing called Bitcoin that's starting to become a thing, and a lot of gamers were early into Bitcoin, so it was like a big theme in the early days. And so I read it. I remember looking at the Wikipedia link for Bitcoin, and I was like, wow, you could mine this thing. It's like a golden goose. You could create your own Bitcoins out of this. And I was kind of like crazy impressed and then dismissive, like most people are, still to this day, about the technology and who's behind it and who's Satoshi and all the kind of instinctual things a person on the street would say. So I was super intrigued but dismissive, and it took me about a year of trying to figure it out. And that happened because I was traveling back to Chicago, talking to people. I went to San Francisco and up and down Sand Hill Road. And I'm like, this is really interesting. What do you guys think? And it was Well, the interesting part about early days of Bitcoin is nobody really wanted to think about it, touch it, because the narrative was encased in like malicious activity, the Silk Road, buying drugs, and that narrative on some people's psyche still holds true today. And so going up and down Sand Hill Road to talk to people about this, because you want to compare notes or what have you, it was a flat line. Nobody really was engaged. And then, in later years, not only were they still disengaged, but their LP documents, the way in which they invest capital, they were precluded from investing in, the typical document can invest in real estate or oil and gas or currencies, or, there's these prohibited, investments as a venture firm. And so they kind of looked at, well, if it's like a currency, we can't invest in it anyway. So they found every excuse in the world to avoid getting into Bitcoin in the early days. And I kind of, I don't know if it's something I learned, but maybe intuition was like, when everybody doesn't like something, it's like you could be a leader in it if you go early and deep. And so it was just by fortune that I just, locked myself in a room and I just studied Bitcoin for like a week, and came out of it saying like, this is something definitely special, interesting, and unique. And then at the other end of it, I was like, okay, who else is doing this? And I started looking at conferences and people and trying to kind of network and connect with what was happening at the time.
Hey, if you like this clip, be sure to check out the full interview and more only on realvision.com/crypto. It's 100% free. Sign up now.